He always spoke like he won. But in El Cajon, miles away from our perfect life in La Jolla, I learned how silence can scream. I stopped arguing with him and started writing. My revenge wasn't fast. It was built piece by piece, powered by silence, and when I finally acted, no one saw it coming. Especially not him. The clink of heavy silver on porcelain was the only sound at the table. Robert had just finished a story about his time at the hospital, and our guests were hanging on every word. Our La Jolla dining room was warm, filled with the scent of roast lamb and the expensive cologne Robert always wore. Candlelight made the crystal glasses sparkle. But the early days must have been something, said Mark, one of Robert's former colleagues. Eleanor, Robert was telling me you two met right before his residency. How did that happen again? I smiled. It was a story I loved. Oh, well, it was raining so hard that day in Boston, I began. I was running for the bus, my book clutched under my coat, and I ran straight into him. My papers went everywhere, into the gutter. Stop, stop. Robert's voice was loud. He was laughing, a big rolling sound that made the wine in my glass tremble. He held up one hand. You're embarrassing me, dear, I stopped. The fork in my hand felt heavy. Ah, Eleanor, he said, his voice dropping into a tone of fond amusement. He turned to the table, always the romantic. Her memory gets a bit creative. I felt the heat on my neck. I looked at the dark red wine in my glass. I didn't need to look at the other guests. I knew their expressions. A little pity, a lot of relief that it wasn't them. Robert reached over and patted my hand. His skin was dry, his touch light and dismissive. It wasn't raining, dear. It was the sunniest day in March. I had my convertible. I saw her drop her books and I pulled over. She's turned it into a movie scene over the years. He laughed again, and the table laughed with him. It's all right, he said, squeezing my hand once before pulling away. We all get the details mixed up at our age. He was 73. I was 71. My memory was perfectly clear. I remembered the damp chill. I remembered the smell of wet wool. I remembered him handing me my ruined copy of The Age of Innocence. But I didn't argue. I didn't correct his correction. I felt the familiar feeling, the one I always got when he did this. It wasn't anger anymore. It was a deep, cold emptiness. He hadn't just changed the details. He had erased my part of the story. He had made me unreliable, a silly, romantic old woman. I picked up my wine glass. I took a small sip. The wine tasted sour. Anyway, as I was saying about that board meeting, Robert steered the conversation back to himself. His voice filled the room. It always filled the room. For decades, I had been the silent partner, the quiet, supportive wife of the great Dr. Robert Vance, the one who organized the parties, managed the household, and raised our children, the one whose opinions were creative and whose feelings were inconvenient. I looked at him. He was animated, his hands cutting the air as he made a point. He was handsome, charismatic, and completely emotionally vacant. At least he was vacant towards me. I smiled faintly. I nodded, and I went silent. It was a different kind of silence. It wasn't the silence of submission. It wasn't the silence of hurt. It was the silence of a decision. The guests laughed at another of Robert's jokes. I picked up my fork and pushed a piece of lamb around my plate. He thought he had won. He thought he had quieted me, put me back in my place. He had been doing it for 40 years. He didn't know that this silence was different. This was the last time I would be corrected. This was the night I stopped arguing. This was the night I decided to stop trying to be heard and started to plan. I was going to write an ending he would never see coming. Robert left for his golf game at 10 o'clock sharp, just like every Tuesday. He kissed my cheek. The gesture was brief, his skin dry. He expected me to be in the garden or reading by the pool when he returned. An hour later, I was at the bus stop on La Jolla Boulevard. The bus arrived with a loud hiss of its air brakes. I climbed on and paid in cash. The plastic seat was hard and cold. The bus smelled of diesel fumes and old vinyl. We drove east, away from the ocean breeze. The shiny storefronts and art galleries of La Jolla turned into wide streets lined with strip malls and car dealerships. Robert hated this part of the county. He called it chaotic and ungrateful. I found it honest. I got off the bus in El Cajon. The air was hotter here, drier, and smelled like dust. I found a small park with a shaded bench near a dry fountain. Children were shouting on a play structure nearby. I walked a few more blocks until I found what I was looking for, a small cafe called El Sol de Oro. Inside, it smelled of frying tortillas and strong, dark coffee. A television in the corner played a soccer game. I sat in a booth at the back. The vinyl seat was cracked and taped in one spot. A waitress came over. "Coffee, ma'am?" "Yes, black." "Thank you." When she brought the mug, it was thick and heavy. The coffee was bitter, but it was hot. I took my bag and pulled out a new spiral-bound notebook, a plain blue one, and a simple black pen. I opened it to the first clean page. This was not a diary. I did not write about my feelings. I did not write about the dinner party or the 40 years of small insults. My feelings were already there. They were the reason. I wrote about the facts. I wrote June 14th, 1998, The Beach House. Robert said the title needed to be in his name alone for tax purposes. I underlined tax purposes. I have the letter from the bank showing the actual transfer was a condition of his private loan. I turned the page. March 2005, the sale of my father's stocks. Robert invested the inheritance for me. The account was closed in 2007. The money was moved to his personal brokerage account. Account number... I wrote down dates, amounts, and account numbers I had memorized years ago. I wrote down the names of his private lawyers. I documented every broken promise that had a $sign attached to it. Every time he called me financially naive, right before he moved an asset. The act of writing it down changed things. The hurt, which had been a heavy, shapeless feeling, became a list. It became cold. It became data. It became a plan. I did this 3 times a week. I always came home before he did. I smelled like bus exhaust and coffee, but he never got close enough to notice. He only noticed my new quiet. One evening, he found me reading in the living room. He poured himself a whiskey. "You've been much more peaceful lately, Eleanor," he said. He swirled the dark liquid in his glass. "I'm glad. I was worried that dinner party upset you. You get so emotional." I looked up from my book. "I'm fine, Robert. Just thinking. Good." He smiled, satisfied. He thought I was beaten. He mistook my silence for surrender. His mistake made him careless. A week later, he came into the study while I was paying the household bills. "Eleanor," he said, his voice full of business, "I found a wonderful safe investment, an offshore opportunity. Very secure. I'm going to move the bulk of our retirement fund into it, just to protect it from market changes, you understand." I looked at the paperwork he held out. It was a thicket of technical terms. It was designed to confuse. "That sounds wise, Robert," I said. My voice was perfectly even. "Exactly. Don't you worry your head about it. I'll handle everything." He smiled, patted my shoulder, and left the folder on his desk. That night, I waited. I listened until I heard the deep, even sound of his breathing from our bedroom. I got up. I walked silently down the carpeted hall to his study. The room smelled like his leather chair and old paper. He hadn't even closed his laptop. He never locked it. He never thought he needed to. The safe investment was right there on the screen. A bank in the Cayman Islands, a form that was half filled out. I took my phone from my robe pocket. I photographed the screen, the account number, the name of the bank, the transfer schedule. I closed the laptop. The screen went dark. Robert was accelerating his plan. But now, so was I. The ballroom smelled of lilies and expensive perfume. Hundreds of people dressed in tuxedos and evening gowns filled the space. The sound of their chatter was a low, constant hum under the music of a string quartet. Robert was at the head of our table, accepting congratulations. His face flushed with success. "Dr. Vance, your generosity is truly an inspiration," a woman in a bright red dress said, touching his arm. "Please, please," Robert said, his voice smooth and modest. "We just do what we can. Don't we, Eleanor?" He gestured to me. I smiled and nodded. The woman's eyes passed over me, registering me as a simple accessory, and then moved back to Robert. After the dessert plates were cleared, a man went to the podium. He spoke about Robert's long career, his service to the community, and his incredible financial contributions. Finally, he said, "Please welcome to the stage San Diego's Philanthropist of the Year, Dr. Robert Vance." The room erupted. A bright white light hit our table. Robert stood up, buttoned his tuxedo jacket, and walked to the stage. He shook the man's hand and accepted the heavy glass award. He tapped the microphone. The small sound echoed in the quiet room. "Thank you," he said. His voice was deep, practiced. "Thank you. I am humbled." He spoke for 10 minutes. He spoke about legacy. He spoke about building a better future. He spoke about the importance of giving back. "But I could not have done it alone," he said, pausing for effect. He turned and looked directly at our table. The spotlight swung and caught me. I didn't blink. "My wife, Eleanor," he said, his voice full of warmth. "For 45 years, she has been my quiet partner, my support. She has managed our home, our family, and our lives with a grace that has allowed me to focus on the work. This award, this is as much hers as it is mine." The applause was deafening. People at the tables near me turned to smile. I smiled back. It was a small, sad smile. My melancholy was deep, but my hand was steady where it rested on the white tablecloth. As the applause began to fade, a woman approached our table. She was not one of the guests. She wore a simple, dark blue suit and carried a black leather portfolio. She moved with a quiet efficiency, walking directly to Robert's empty chair. She waited. Robert finished his speech, held the award high, and walked back to the table. He was energized, his eyes bright. He saw the woman and his smile faltered, replaced by a look of mild irritation. "Dr. Vance?" the woman asked. Her voice was low but clear. "Yes? I'm quite busy, as you can see," he said, gesturing to the crowd. "This is for you. From Mrs. Vance." The woman did not hand him the portfolio. She opened it and took out a thick, ring-bound folder. It was plain white. She placed it on the table, directly on his dessert plate. Then she turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd before Robert could say a word. He looked at me. I was watching him. His irritation turned to confusion. He looked at the folder. He opened the cover. The first page was a summary. I knew because I had the auditor draft it 3 times. It was titled, "Report on Concealed Marital Assets, Vance Estate." Robert's hand, the one holding the cover, began to shake. He turned the first page. It was a copy of the transfer request to the Cayman Islands Bank, the one I had photographed from his laptop. He turned the page again. A list of account numbers. He turned again. A flowchart showing how my inheritance had been moved from our joint account to his private brokerage. His face was losing its color. The flush of victory was gone. He looked pale, his skin gray under the warm lights of the ballroom. He kept turning, page after page of his safe investments, his tax purposes, his secrets, all printed in black ink. He reached the last section. The paper was thicker. It was the finalized petition for divorce. I had signed it that morning. I saw him read the specific line, the one that cited financial fraud as the primary grounds. His smile was gone. It had frozen and then collapsed. He slowly lifted his head. His eyes met mine. He looked small. He looked old. I didn't smile. I didn't look angry. I just looked at him. I held his gaze. The sounds of the room, the chatter, the clinking glasses, seemed to fade away. There was only this, my silence. In my silence, he finally heard me. He heard the 40 years of corrections, the dismissals, the pats on the hand. He heard the dinner party. He heard it all. He opened his mouth. No sound came out. He realized his victory was not real. His award was just a piece of glass. His legacy was the white folder sitting on his plate. A man from the next table came over, his hand outstretched. Robert, magnificent speech. Truly magnificent. Robert was trapped. He couldn't stand. He couldn't shout. He couldn't leave. He had to sit there, in the center of his adoring crowd, with his entire world undone in front of him. He looked at me one last time. He looked terrified. Robert was still staring at the papers when the man from the next table clapped him on the shoulder. "Robert, A moment for a photo. Robert's head snapped up. He looked trapped. He tried to force a smile, but it was a failure. It was a painful, tight grimace. He couldn't make a scene. He was the philanthropist of the year. He was surrounded. I stood up. My chair made a soft scraping sound on the floor, but no one noticed. The string quartet had started playing again. Robert's eyes followed me as I picked up my small black purse from the table. He didn't speak. He couldn't. I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I walked across the thick carpet, past the tables of laughing, drinking people. I walked out of the ballroom, leaving the smell of lilies and warm food behind me. The grand lobby was empty, except for a hotel attendant polishing a brass railing. He nodded at me. I nodded back. The automatic glass doors slid open with a quiet whoosh. The night air was cool and clean. It smelled like the sea. A black sedan was parked at the curb, exactly where I had arranged for it to be. The driver stepped out and opened the back door for me. He didn't ask my name. "Good evening, ma'am." "Good evening," I said. I got in. The seat was soft leather. The car pulled away from the curb, leaving the bright lights of the hotel behind. We drove through the downtown streets, past bars and restaurants, and then onto the freeway. I watched the city lights move past the window. I did not tell the driver to go to La Jolla. I did not go back to the large, cold house. We drove west toward the coast, to Ocean Beach. The driver stopped in front of an older 3-story apartment building. It was modest, simple. "Thank you," I said. "You're paid in full," I got out. The air here was heavy with salt. I could hear the sound of the waves, a low, constant rhythm just 2 blocks away. I let myself into the building and walked up the stairs to the 3rd floor. The apartment was small. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with an old gas stove. It smelled of salt air and clean old wood. I had rented it 3 weeks ago under my maiden name. I paid the deposit and 3 months' rent in cash. The money came from a small inheritance from my aunt, left to me and me alone. Robert had never known about it. In 45 years, he had never once thought to ask about my side of the family, or if I had any resources of my own. He just assumed that what was mine was his, and what was his was his. I walked to the single window in the living room. I opened it. The sound of the ocean was louder now. I stood there for a long time, just breathing. I had no furniture, only a single suitcase I had packed and hidden in my car trunk, which the driver had retrieved for me. I did not wake up in La Jolla the next morning. I woke up on a simple mattress on the floor of the apartment. The sun was streaming through the window, but I knew what was happening back at the house. I had planned it, step by step. I knew Robert would wake up alone. He would find my side of the bed cold. He would see my closet, half empty. He would call my name, first with irritation, then with something else. He would go to his study. He would go straight to his computer. He would try to log into the offshore account. He would try to move the money, to hide it faster. He would find his access denied. He would find his personal accounts frozen. He would find his brokerage account, the one filled with my inheritance, locked. And then, just as his panic started to turn into rage, his private phone would ring. It would be his lawyer. The lawyer would be shouting. The auditor I hired, the professional woman in the dark blue suit, had been at the courthouse at 8:01 a.m. She had filed the emergency injunction. She had presented the first 10 pages of the white folder. Robert was trapped. The man who loved to talk, the man who dominated every room, had no words. He was alone in that big, silent house, with his reputation and his bank accounts crumbling all around him. My revenge wasn't just the gala. It was this morning. It was the silence he woke up to. The conference room was cold. The air conditioning was set too high, and it carried a faint chemical smell of carpet cleaner. I sat on one side of a long, polished table. Its surface was so reflective, I could see the flat gray light from the windows on it. This was a neutral space. Not my lawyer's office, not Robert's. A mediation firm downtown on the 12th floor. The only sound was the distant hum of traffic far below. My lawyer, a quiet woman named Ms. Chen, sat beside me. Next to her was the auditor, the woman from the gala. Her name was Sarah. She had her laptop and a thin black folder. The door opened. Robert came in, followed by his lawyer. I had not seen him in 3 weeks, not since the charity dinner. He looked different. His expensive suit, a dark charcoal gray, seemed too big for him. His face was thin, his skin papery. The confident, booming energy was gone. He looked his age. He looked 73 and tired. He would not look at me. He sat down opposite me and stared at the wood grain of the table. "Good morning," his lawyer, Mr. Harris, said. His voice was loud, filling the silence. "Let's be clear. We are here to discuss this unfortunate misunderstanding. Dr. Vance has been a pillar of this community for half a century. The allegations of fraud are, frankly, insulting." Ms. Chen didn't respond. She simply nodded to Sarah. Sarah opened her laptop. She did not speak. She turned the laptop around so Robert and his lawyer could see the screen. She clicked a file. A spreadsheet opened. "We see no fraud," Mr. Harris continued, his voice strained. "We see a husband engaging in prudent financial management. A man protecting his family's legacy from market volatility." Robert shifted in his chair. He cleared his throat. "Eleanor," he said. It was the first time he had spoken. His voice was rough. I looked at him. "Eleanor, what is this?" he asked. He tried to gesture, but his hand just twitched on the table. "Our life, our home, after everything I've given you. You're destroying it. You're destroying me. Over some creative accounting?" He used that word. Creative. The same word he used at the dinner party. He was trying to use the old words, the old tactics. "Eleanor, listen to me." He leaned forward. "Think about our age. People will find out about this. They'll think you're unwell, confused." I felt the chill from the air vent on my hands. I did not reply to him. I did not look at him anymore. I looked at Ms. Chen. Ms. Chen nodded just once. "Sarah, the timeline, please." Sarah clicked another file. She turned the laptop back to Robert's side of the table. "This is a timeline, Mr. Harris," she said, her voice calm and clear. "On May 12, 2011, she said, Mrs. Vance was hospitalized for pneumonia. On May 13th, Dr. Vance initiated a wire transfer of $85,000 from their joint checking to his private brokerage account, the one his wife did not have access to." Robert's head jerked up. "On September 3rd, 2014, Sarah continued, Mrs. Vance underwent surgery for a broken wrist. She was under anesthesia for 4 hours. According to bank records, during that exact 4-hour window, Dr. Vance visited their joint safe deposit box and removed the bearer bonds inherited from Mrs. Vance's father. Those bonds were deposited into his private account the next day," she went on. She listed 3 other dates, 3 other hospital stays, a bad flu, a knee replacement. Each one matched a significant financial transfer. Mr. Harris, Robert's lawyer, had gone completely pale. He was reading the screen, his mouth slightly open. He had clearly not seen this. Robert was no longer looking at the screen. He was staring at me. His eyes were wide. There was no anger in them now, only a raw, desperate kind of understanding. I had not just documented his theft, I had documented his cruelty. He had systematically used the moments I was weakened, the moments I was sick or in pain, to betray me. The room was absolutely silent. The hum of the traffic outside seemed to have stopped. Robert's lawyer, Mr. Harris, slowly closed his leather notebook. He took a breath. He looked at his client. Robert just stared at me, his face a mask of defeat. The man who always had an answer, who always won, had nothing. Mr. Harris cleared his throat. The small sound was loud in the cold room. "My client," he said, his voice flat, "is prepared to discuss a full settlement." Robert didn't look up. He just put his face in his hands. The sound of the ocean was the first thing I heard every morning. It was a constant, low rush of water, not the heavy manufactured silence of the La Jolla house. My apartment in Ocean Beach was small, but the windows were large, and they were open. I felt the salt spray on my face when I drank my coffee. I walked to the pier every day. I'd buy a coffee from a small stand where the man behind the counter, who had a long gray beard, would just nod and say, "The usual, Eleanor." He knew me as Eleanor. Just Eleanor. My life was quiet, but it was not empty. The lawyers handled everything. Ms. Chen would call me once a week. "Robert has agreed to the terms of the sale, Eleanor," she said one Tuesday. Her voice was always calm, professional. "The house in La Jolla will be listed by the end of the week." "And the contents?" I asked. I was looking at a pelican sitting on a wooden post. "He has not contested the division. An estate auction will handle the furniture and art. They have asked if you wish to retrieve any personal items." I thought about it. The grand furniture, the heavy silver, the art Robert had bought as an investment. They were not mine. They were part of a life that wasn't mine. Just a few things. 2 boxes from my closet, and the books in the study. I went back one last time. I hired a mover, a young man with a small truck, to meet me there. Robert was not there. His lawyers had made sure of it. The house was cold. The air inside was still and smelled like dust and old lilies. My footsteps echoed on the marble floor of the foyer. The house was a museum to a life I didn't want. I went to the bedroom. I packed my mother's jewelry and a few old photographs of my children. I went to the study. I packed my books, the ones I had read and reread, the ones he had never touched. Within 30 minutes, the boxes were in the truck. I stood in the doorway and looked back at the grand staircase, the high ceilings, the crystal chandelier. It felt like a hotel. It felt like a place I had visited once a long time ago. I closed the door and locked it. A month later, the house was sold. The auction was over. The money, my half, was in a new bank account. An account with only my name on it. One last envelope was forwarded from the La Jolla address. It was heavy, cream-colored paper. His handwriting was on the front. I hadn't seen his handwriting in years. It was spidery and it slanted to the left. I sat at my small kitchen table. The sun was warm on my hands. I opened it. "Eleanor," it began, "I don't understand. After everything I provided, I gave you a beautiful home, a good life. I didn't know you were so unhappy. Why didn't you just say something? I read that last line twice. Why didn't you just say something?" I thought of the dinner party. I thought of the 1,000 other dinner parties, the quiet corrections, the hand pats, the dismissals. I thought of him telling me my memory was creative. I had been saying something for 40 years. He just hadn't been listening. I folded the letter. I did not read the rest. I didn't need to know his excuses. They were his words, and his words had no power anymore. They were just noise, like a distant television. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and dropped the letter into the wastebasket. My phone rang. I looked at the screen. It was Ms. Chen. "Eleanor," she said, "the final papers are here. The judge has signed off. It's done." 6 months later, I was back at the cafe in El Cajon. It was a warm afternoon. The air smelled of hot asphalt, strong coffee, and the sweet corn of frying tortillas. The television in the corner was playing a telenovela with the volume turned low. I was in the same booth at the back, the one with the cracked vinyl seat. The same waitress came over. She was older, her hair tied back in a net. "Coffee, ma'am?" "Yes, black." "Thank you, Maria." She brought the thick, heavy mug. The coffee was still bitter, still hot. I took a sip. I had a notebook in front of me, but it wasn't the old blue spiral-bound one. This one was bound in soft brown leather. I had bought it in Ocean Beach with my own money. I opened it. The pages were full of my handwriting. I picked up my pen. I was near the end. I wrote, "The woman walked out of the hotel. She did not look back. She could hear the ocean, even from that far away." I was writing my story, not the one Robert had tried to shape, but my own. The divorce was final. The La Jolla house had been sold to a tech executive from San Francisco. The money my half was secure. I had enough. More than enough. I never heard from Robert. After the lawyers' meeting, he had simply disappeared. I heard, through Ms. Chen, that he had moved out of state, somewhere on the East Coast, to live near his sister. He had not contested the settlement. The evidence was too complete. He had no words left. My revenge was not a loud, crashing thing. It was not a fire. It was a slow, quiet, meticulous construction. It was built with time, and bus rides, and cups of bitter coffee. It was built with facts. It was never about destroying him. It was about reclaiming me, It was about taking back the pieces of my life he had tried to correct, to change, or to steal. I paused my writing. I looked out the window. People walked by on the hot sidewalk. A mother pushed a stroller. Two men in work shirts were laughing, carrying bags of food. I was just another person in a cafe, watching the world go by. I was not Dr. Vance's wife. I was not a creative memory. I was just Eleanor. I thought about the letter he sent. Why didn't you just say something? I had. My silence, all those years, had been a statement. But the silence I built in El Cajon, the one I used to write my plan, that was the one he finally heard. I took another sip of coffee. I turned back to my notebook and picked up my pen. I had a final chapter to finish. I was at peace. My silence, in the end, had been louder and more final than anything he ever said.